Hey Brooks, welcome to Lead Time Chats.
Hey, what's going on? It's good to see you again. Thanks for making some time for me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because today the topic we're talking about is prioritizing diversity and inclusion on teams, especially remote teams. So maybe just to start us off, maybe just tell us a little bit about the work you do with companies through MergingPath, your company.
Yeah. So my company MergingPath, there's kind of two sides to it. The one side is executive coaching and interpersonal communications training. So I help managers and leaders with crafting messages, having difficult conversations in the workplace, hiring people, firing people, all the kind of stuff around communication. And then the other half of my work is in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So I'm a DEI advisor for 3 different companies, kind of help them stand up some programs, develop a strategy for the diversity and inclusion. So, which I think is really interesting because a lot of that's very much related to interpersonal communications too. How do we talk about forms of bias when they show up in the workplace? Developing programs and processes for helping employees talk to each other a little bit better. So it's all kind of connected like that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. I think when
Yeah.
people think about diversity inclusion, they often, at a very basic level, think about hiring, right? Like, how do we get more like candidates that add to the diversity of our company or our team? I guess like from your experience and the companies you work with, like beyond hiring, what should companies be thinking about if they want to really prioritize diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. Well, I tell companies a lot of times in conversations in the middle of trainings and the one-on-one stuff, we can spend all the money and the time building the most diverse team that the world has ever seen. But if you do nothing for inclusion, those people will leave the company and they ain't going to leave saying good things about it either. So it's not just about how do we find people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, religion, thinking about all these other forms of bias that show up. But what are we doing on purpose with intention to keep people here? And what are we doing to start to ask ourselves better questions about how we're showing up in the workplace and treating people as well?
Mm-hmm. What are some of the, I guess, surface areas where people should be really thinking about making changes?
Well, I find it really interesting. A lot of companies have kind of started and ended their diversity initiatives by just focusing on hiring more women.
Right.
And I think the reason why that happens is because everyone has a woman in their life. So it makes it an easier conversation. Doesn't matter if you're gay, you're straight, you're a transgender person, non-binary, your mom, your sister, your cousin, your dentist, your barista, your attorney, your veterinarian. Everyone has a
Right.
woman in their life, but not everyone has a Black person in their life
Mhm.
or a transgender person or a non-binary person in their life. So if we are just focusing on the binary perspective of gender and
Mhm.
focusing our efforts on women, a lot of companies stop there. So you'll actually see a lot of the board mandates that happened these last couple of years. The first step was requiring companies to hire more women. And
Mhm.
so very important part of this discussion. And we have to continue the discussion and find other ways of building these things here together. So I think on a surface level, a lot of companies just stop from the binary gender perspective.
Yeah. It reminds me of like you often hear people, when they talk about diversity and bringing more women in it, they talk about, oh, I have a daughter. Like it's like you don't need
Yeah.
to wait till you have a daughter to like really care about this.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's so funny. I hear a lot of people here. They have their kid like, oh, I've never thought about dating in this way. And now that I have a daughter, I'm going to go. I'm like, I'm happy that you're doing these things, but to your point, yeah, like where was all these thoughts before? But unfortunately, that's just kind of human
Yeah.
nature for a lot of people. They don't see things unless it starts to affect them personally.
Mhm. What
Yeah.
about like so you're saying a lot of companies they just think about, how do you hire more women or really focus on women and their diversity and inclusion efforts. What you coach a lot of leaders and you take them through these unconscious bias courses and all these other courses, like how do you like what's effective in helping them see that that's, that's quite limited?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the ways that I start is um, just kind of level setting. And sometimes people go into these trainings and these discussions very hesitant because they think that they're going to get blamed or yelled at or ridiculed. And the first thing that we do, we kind of level set, like, everyone has bias. You have bias, I have bias. I teach this stuff for a living and I have biases. And so the first step, I think, is to level set, make sure we're all kind of on the same page, that this is something that we really need to lean into, and creating the type of environment where people can actually say the things and ask the questions that they probably wouldn't say in other situations and circumstances. Because there's all this stuff that's in the ether that people are afraid to talk about. So, like, if you don't put those things out there, how are we going to make any meaningful change? One of my favorite comments that someone made, a question in my class. There was a group of 50 people on a Zoom screen, and there was a white guy, and he said, I feel really uncomfortable saying this, but I feel like this is the space to talk about this stuff. I'm an executive recruiter, and whenever I'm interviewing a candidate on LinkedIn who is Black, I'm far less intimidated than I am if I'm interviewing the same level candidate who is white. And I don't know why that is, but I want to ask you that here, and I feel like this is the time to talk about it. And so that question and that comment right there is exactly what we're here to talk about. And so if no one asks that question or brings a conversation there, then we're just kind of staying at the surface level when we're trying to figure out how to become a more diverse and inclusive organization.
So facilitating that space where people feel safe, maybe, bringing the topics that they are worried about. Oh, I don't want to be accused of being racist, or like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, like all those. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the other things, like, we can do racist, sexist, and homophobic things and not be racist, sexist, and homophobic people. It's about the actions and the behaviors that we take that are influenced by our entire life of media, music, movies that have been influencing how we're showing up. And so I think that's part of the level setting here too. Like, we gotta ask these questions and make these comments, or otherwise we're just going to be stuck.
Um, I know you are doing this work pre-pandemic. I'm curious if you've seen any like challenges in diversity and inclusion that are different when more teams are remote than in person.
Mm. Yeah, well, so the first thing that comes to mind, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges coming back to the office, which a lot of companies are struggling with now. First of all, there is no company that has ever, at least the people working there who are alive, who has ever brought people back to work after a global pandemic. So, I mean, there's no playbook for this. There's no rule book for this. We are making this up as we go along. And so there's been a bunch of case studies where people from underrepresented groups don't want to go back to the workplace because there's less of a chance of those microaggressions continuing to happen to them. So I think one of the challenges that's going to be coming up pretty soon is, as we are making these adjustments, how do we conquer and think about and be proactive around microaggressions that haven't been happening these last couple of years? I'm saying they haven't been happening, but haven't been happening to the extent as if we were in person.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have assumed, like, I guess it's just a different dynamic, because in person you do get a little bit more, small talk over lunch. You get to know people a little bit more personally. And so, but yeah, the microaggressions as well. I was just remembering kind of towards the beginning of the pandemic, I feel like a lot of people were really struggling, feeling very lonely. And I talked to one friend who's an Asian woman at a tech company, and she had seemed really unhappy at her job. And I called her up and she's like, I'm doing great. Like, right. She's like pulled out of the toxic work environment. She's like, I just log into my Zoom calls, and then, like, I get off a Zoom call, I can do whatever I want in my apartment. Right. She was like just thriving. So it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think what the pandemic has done, it's made us kind of really think about how we are gauging people's performance. I mean, so much of promotions and performance evaluations are affected by the fact that you and I and three other people can go out for a drink after work.
Yeah.
And so we haven't been able to do that. So all this small talk in the office that has a lot of positive benefits, bringing us together, has nothing to do with our promotional process. And yet it has everything to do with our promotional process. So it's going to be a really tricky time for companies to figure out how to bring employees back, think about diversity and inclusion, and really force us to look at the specific, actionable, and measurable things that people are doing or not doing to get them that promotion and move forward in their career.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Range works on communication tools for remote teams and hybrid teams, and I've always felt like really nailing that and making information really available and meetings inclusive, it can be challenging, but it's really because we weren't doing that much of it in person, right? We were kind of like letting things kind of fly by, however it was going. And then people, the people who were important or in the know would get the information, but then there were definitely people who didn't have equal access to information. And so like everyone being remote kind of forced companies to figure out like, okay, how do you build belonging, right? When we're all sitting in our own rooms, how do you make sure that, we get team updates and we know what people are working on, instead of just like, oh, I know because we hang out at lunch, right? And we're buds. And so I think like nailing that on remote teams has like made remote teams more, I mean, it is challenging because you have to do it with more intention, but it kind of solved some of those issues that were happening in person.
Yeah, you mentioned access to information. That is also part of equity. A lot of people think equity is just compensation, and equity is also like, do I have the opportunity to know and find out as much information as the rest of my peers do? Right now, I'm not saying that everyone in the company has to know everything that's happening the moment that it happens, but people who are at my same level, do I have that equal access to information? And another part of equity is also consequences. I actually want to be held to the same standard and punished, for lack of a better term, the same way as the next person who did the same thing that I did. So that's all part of the equity piece there too. And all of that is adjusted by the way that we interact with each other when we're sitting down at lunch together or doing a happy hour at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I read something a while back that said that underrepresented groups actually didn't get the same detailed feedback in their careers, like constructive feedback, because people are like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or, I don't want to like hurt this person's feeling. They're a little bit less willing to just give them straight feedback, constructive feedback. And so they don't get the information they need to grow in their careers, which I found was quite interesting.
People are afraid of saying the wrong thing. People are afraid of the other person taking the feedback in the wrong way. And there's also all these other perceptions about how people view the way that we're showing up. So for me as a Black male, if there are some people that have no experience having a Black male as a manager or an executive coach or a colleague or in your personal life, some people have never had a Black person over their house for dinner with them and their family. If you haven't, it doesn't mean that someone's racist, but it means that they're missing that familiarity of having someone who looks like me, having a serious conversation in the workplace. And so there could be some people who are intimidated by me or feel that that I'm, the classic word aggressive, which shows up for a lot of people of color in the workplace, particularly Black women in the workplace. And so if we're not giving underrepresented people this feedback because we are afraid or we don't want to hurt their feelings, then we're actually holding them back in their career. And that's another form of exclusion and work. Another form of exclusion is not sharing feedback with people for whatever that reason happens to be. And so that's one of the things that's going to be really important. We got to start to fix this and have these open conversations about how to deliver feedback in a more useful way in the workplace.
What about feedback that is kind of like somewhat aligned with the stereotypes of that group? So for example, say there's a woman, I I think women often like, and like a more outspoken woman often will get the feedback that they're abrasive, right? Like
Yep.
basically never get that word with men in their feedback.
Yeah, I'm ambitious and assertive, but you are abrasive and
right.
aggressive.
I'm
Yeah.
right. The men are confident and
Passionate.
assertive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Women are abrasive and emotional. So yeah, I guess if you have a situation where you feel like there is some truth to that is holding that person back, I found that those are the situations where it's most difficult to give that feedback, because you kind of want to acknowledge that like you have that bias too, and it's also like, maybe it wouldn't be seen as abrasive with if this person were a man. So there's kind of like this societal bias, your personal bias. And so then I think in a lot of cases people just end up not knowing how to give that feedback and then not giving the feedback.
Yeah. So 3 things that I guide people on when those situations come up. Number 1 is relationship building. And so there's a lot of managers out there who don't talk to their employees, don't schedule regular one-on-one meetings. And so, yeah, the first time you got to deliver some tough feedback, yeah, it's going to be a little uncomfortable for you because you have not built any relationship along the way. It's like you and I, Gene, we've known each other for years now. And like, we're at the point in our friendship where we can speak openly to each other because we have the relationship built, and there's nothing that you're going to do or say that's going to like make me not want to continue our friendship, and the same thing, vice versa, as we're talking about it. So first is relationship building. I challenge all the managers out there. Is this your first time ever having a serious conversation with your employee? Number 2 is questions of ourself. And so if I'm delivering feedback to someone in the workplace, I need to be able to ask myself, am I using these adjectives and describing this person in the same way that I would if this person was identified differently? This person was a non-binary person or an Asian woman or an Indian man. I need to be able to ask myself those questions as a check before I give the feedback. And the third thing they have to do is, what are the specific, actionable, and measurable things? So for instance, if I say to you that your tone of voice is too aggressive in meetings, what does that mean?
So well, I've heard from other people that your tone is aggressive in meetings, like, which is like the worst, right? Because then it's like everyone's talking about you behind your back.
Yeah. Now, that's important information for the person to know what other people are saying and perceiving, but that is useless when it comes to a manager evaluating that person's performance based off of hearsay. And so that same question, I would challenge that manager to go back to those people who said that and say, what are the specific, actionable, and measurable things you want Jean to do to change her aggressive tone of voice? If they can't answer that question, it's probably coming from their bias. Now, like if you walk into the meeting and you put both hands on the desk and you stand over top of Brian and you say, I'm gonna take your damn job one day. Okay, like that's some specific, actionable, measurable things I want you to stop doing. But if it's just your tone of voice, how are you supposed to change that? And so, and if you are not used to having someone around you who has a very direct tone, then that will inform your biases on how that person's showing up. I mean, think of all the people at work from underrepresented groups who didn't get the promotion because people were not used to their tone. Those words are aggressive. People being intimidated. That's another of my favorite ones in a workplace. Intimidation has nothing to do with me. Like, you get to decide if you're intimidated by me or not. And so if you are feeling that way by me because of my aggression, that's going to hold you back. That's going to hold me back when you're evaluating my performance. So like, these little words and actions matter intensely. And so we haven't been spending enough time thinking about these phrases that we throw around the workplace like it's nothing, like calling people who are women aggressive, or this person's not the right culture fit. Not creating space for introverts in the room to share their ideas. Like we haven't been talking about those things. Like think
Yeah.
of all the ideas that were never shared because the extroverts of the room never created space for the introverts to speak.
Mhm.
Ideas that could have changed companies and organizations that are just lost in the wind. And we think that we have to teach the introverts how to speak up. Why don't we
Right.
teach the extroverts how to create more space?
Yeah. We have a few other lead time chats around like inclusive meetings and, changing up the structure where you can actually, one thing I like to do is just like give people like 2 minutes to think about something and then go around the room and call on each person. And, if you're just like, who has anyone want to share anything about this? You might
That's
get,
the worst.
one person or just like crickets, right? And it's just like,
Mhm.
anyone, Bueller, right? Like,
Well,
but
that happens. And what also happens is people asking the question, but they don't really care. You know, it's like you're walking to the office and it's like, hey, Gene, how you doing? And you like, do I really want to? Do I really? Because if I really cared, I would have like stopped and like looked at you. You know.
right.
So it's like, hey, anyone have any questions? No, good. Let's move on to the next subject. It's like what? No
Yeah.
space. You know.
Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
the actual genuine invitation and like authentic, I actually do want to hear what you have to say, and giving people, backing that up with actually giving people space and calling on them or finding ways. Or one thing people have said to me is like, I don't know how to get the introverts to engage. Now I just call on them. I'm like, oh, this is so anxiety inducing.
Oh, I know it's the worst. It's the worst. You know, there's all these little like. So one of my friends, Adriana, she has this great technique she uses. She has a little box, and she stands in front of the door of the meeting room, and everyone has to come with two notes. Does it like you cannot show up without two questions, and so as they walk in, they put the notes inside of the box, and she at the end of the meeting she leaves 15 minutes and like opens it up. So now you have some introverts who maybe wouldn't have spoken and shared an idea that now got a chance to share it. You know, like
That's
little things
cool.
like that we can do.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, One question I had was, as teams are, people aren't just working remotely, people are also hiring remotely. And so um, you get teams that are more geographically dispersed, right? So, rather than just having a team that's all living in San Francisco or, San Francisco, East Bay and Peninsula, suddenly you have teams that are, maybe a couple people in the Bay Area, some people like Georgia or Boston, kind of all over the place. And that's just within the US too, right? Like, but you may also
Mhm.
have people hiring internationally and globally as well. I guess what challenges in terms of diversity inclusion have you found with that dynamic?
Yeah, I'm seeing and hearing more of it from like an international perspective, some kind of like
Mhm.
cultural differences. I mean, the time zone thing is always there, right? That's always a challenge. But I think going back to feedback, you know, I think this is really interesting. So many of our challenges at work, the foundation, the root of this is two things: bias and our ability to raise awareness and have a conversation about something in relation to the time that we first noticed it, right? So if it takes me 3 weeks to share feedback with you about something that I saw, like there's something going on for me, for
Mhm.
you, for both of us. So we got to fix those two things. And so I think with teams that are dispersed, geographic locations, teams that are different from cultural considerations, we have to have some conversations about how people like to receive feedback and how
Mhm.
people like to give feedback rather than just making assumptions. Like
Mhm.
for all the managers that are watching this, have you ever had a 30-minute meeting with your team about how we're going to give each other feedback? Like depending on where you come from in the world, maybe depending on where you come from in the country, you may be very direct with your feedback, and that can be the most offensive thing in terms of feedback for someone from a different place. So, like
Mm.
putting all these things out on the table, talking about how we're going to deliver some tough information, those are the kind of things that can help us. But a lot of it is centered around feedback. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I was when I was running workshops for engineers, we would talk to them about like, how people like to work together. And it was fascinating because one of the examples we gave around feedback was like, the shit sandwich, where people like say something
Oh,
nice about you and they say
way
the
worse.
actual constructive feedback or the negative feedback, and then they say something nice. That's like how people were
Yeah.
taught to give feedback, right? And we were like, try not to do that. But then there was one point where we were talking about how people like to receive feedback. I don't think we had called it the shit sandwich yet, but this woman was like, yeah, that thing where people like say something nice and then they like, share the critical feedback and then they say something nice again. I just love that. Like, and she
I
like
hate it.
actually really enjoys it because it just like, I guess it took the edge off a little bit, even though she knew that it was like, that was like a tactic, but she's just like, I really like when people give me feedback that way. So
Oh
you just
man.
never know. Like,
Yeah. Two things with that. It's also called the reverse Oreo cookie, which I don't know why it's called that because people like the cookie too, right? But I guess the icing is the good stuff. For me personally, I find it very patronizing.
yeah.
Like if you got something to say, don't set me up like that. Don't set me up. You got some, just tell me. So I think what can help us remove away from the shit sandwich, aka reverse Oreo cookie, is it's not the process by which we deliver the feedback. It's the relationship that we are building or have built along the way. And so if we set up our conversations by first explaining our intentions, which we oftentimes don't do, right? If I don't explain my intentions, you can make up whatever reason in your mind for why you think I'm sharing this feedback with you.
Yeah.
Maybe you think I don't like you, I'm holding you back from your promotion, or I'm holding a grudge. But if I start off with, hey, Gene, I want to share this feedback with you because I know we both care about you getting that next promotion. And I'm seeing you do some things. And let's going back to another example you shared before. I'm seeing you do some things and I'm hearing some things from some other people that I haven't seen that could be hurting your chances of getting that promotion. Can I share this feedback with you? And so if I've framed up the conversation with safety, I've explained the why behind why I'm sharing this, I don't need the shit sandwich.
Yeah.
Like I've already set it up and I can go right to the feedback with you. Okay, yeah, Brooks, yeah, now's a great time. Okay, here's what I'm hearing and here's what I'm seeing. Seeing you do this thing, this is happening here. I pause. What do you think? We have a conversation about it and then we commit to what are we going to do moving forward. Like that's the way. Like you can, I don't need the reverse Oreo cookie. I need you to be very direct and honest with me. Like don't
Right.
patronize me, don't set me up for failure, just kind of give it to
Yeah.
me. And those are things, if we follow that process, that actually builds inclusion on our teams too.
Yeah. And what you said before, which is having the regular one-on-ones, doing all the relationship building up to that point, that when you have that conversation with someone on your team, they actually trust that what you're saying is true, right? That you're looking
Yeah.
out for them, that you want what's best for them, that you have this positive intent going in.
Yeah, there's so many managers from majority groups who have never had conversations with their employees about how they feel in the workplace. The Fortune 500 CEOs, there's only 45 women. There's only 4 Black people. There's only 2 Black women, 16 Latin and 16 Asian people. And so imagine that being at a conference where you're one of 2 Black women out of 500 people and like how that feels. And there's a lot of people that don't even see that. And so after George Floyd was killed and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, a lot of managers from majority groups went to the workplace and like, I never even noticed that in our 300-person cafeteria, there's only 1 Black person sitting here right now. And so now there's been a huge rush to check in on people of color, and people of color are like getting bombarded from they're like, yo, can I like, I don't want to talk about this because I just talked about it with 5 other people. And so people from those majority groups are now feeling defeated because they're like, Brooks, I tried and I got shut down. I'm like, yeah, but this is the first time you tried in 15 years. So it's going to take some time to build this up. So like, don't be discouraged because you tried. And so if we get discouraged and we stop, we start to break inclusion and go backwards again. And that's what's happening for a lot of companies.
We recently had a conversation at a company meeting where, well, I guess for some context, we had a few of us had reflected that like 3 years ago, if any of the events that are happening now, seemingly like every week, had happened 3 years ago, we would, send a company email, have an all hands to talk about it, make space for people. And now it's just like every week there's a school shooting, like the news is just relentless. And so it feels like we've been a bit desensitized to it. And we're like, should we be talking about it more? And we kind of had this open conversation with the team of like, this is something we noticed. And it was interesting because people were like, I know I can talk about it. Like, I know I can talk about it with my manager. I know I can bring it up, but I really don't want to, right? Like, I don't want to. I know I can. I know I can if I want to, but I don't want to. And like, I don't know, like, it seems like, how do you like advise leaders? How do you talk about these things or not talk about them when, kind of the world is on fire? We still have work to do, right? Like, just how do you navigate that dynamic?
Yeah. If we look for and start to solve and fix for all the other areas about inclusion that are broken, it will make those conversations a lot more safer and a lot more genuine for people. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is not just about stopping police officers from killing Black people. The Black Lives Matter movement is also about, hey, I'm looking at your board of directors of 12 people and there's no Black people there. I'm looking at your C-suite and there's no Black people there. I'm looking at the percentage of managers in your company and there's no Black people there. So like, what are we doing? And so for the manager who's trying to have this talk with the employee from like a work kind of perspective, that employee is still looking at all the other things the company is doing or not doing. The rise in hate crimes towards our Asian Pacific Islander community. I don't want to say any organization's names, but there's an organization where 48% of their employee population is Asian. That's great. We got half the company from underrepresented groups. Yes, we have won, we've solved diversity. Only about 4% of their managers are Asian. And so what's happening there? What's the perspective and the stereotype that's happening towards not placing people who are Asian in positions of power and authority, despite the fact that half of their population are Asian? And so all of these different cultural things that are happening are connected to the workplace. And so this is why a lot of people from underrepresented groups don't want to have conversations with their manager, because they're like, listen, you want to give me a 4% raise? That's great. What are you doing with the board, with the C-suite, with the managers, with this person on my team who took my idea last week and turned it into a PowerPoint presentation and presented it back to the team, which actually happened to one of my clients? Like, what are we doing for the people who didn't even notice that happened? And so I get it that managers are getting discouraged, but like, it's going to take time and intention to fix a lot of the things that have been broken for decades.
Well, I'm hearing a kind of parallel, because we were talking about, one-on-one, how do you give feedback? And you need to really have that history of building that relationship. And I think the same goes for companies, right? Like for companies and managers to be able to talk openly and check in on, their underrepresented groups, see how they're doing when these events happen. They also need to have that history of, showing up for these groups, and not just like, oh shit, we need to issue a statement. Otherwise, like, someone's going to be like, hey, why didn't this company issue a statement? Right. Like kind of to like check the box. Right.
Yeah. I there's no case study behind this. This is just like a thought that I had, but like, if there was a company that had a board of directors that was a diverse team, and the C-suite, and they have a supplier diversity program where they're paying attention to the money that they're choosing to do business with other people, and they have underrepresented people in management positions, and we've done unconscious bias training to learn a process to which to raise these issues of bias, I don't think employees would be as angry as they are about why companies are not talking and saying anything. I just like, because we're talking about it, we're living it every single day. But like, part of the anger is because employees are like, I've been saying this for years, and now
Yeah.
you want to put a black tile on your Instagram feed? Yeah, and install, like, that's it. That's all, like, that's it. And so that's where
Yeah.
a lot of this strife comes from.
Yeah. Well, maybe the takeaway there is not to act based on fear of like, are going to be blamed, or, you know, like kind of what we were saying before of like, people don't bring up these topics because they're worried that they're going to be attacked or blamed. And similarly, I think for companies not to, you know, make their public statements from that place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of rush to these public statements, and it's a tough thing. Like, you know, a company X is not going to solve racism in our country. And these statements are important, but what I think company X can do is start to solve for inclusion within their own organization. Like, that's what people are ultimately like looking for. And so if we don't build these processes and change these policies and become aware of our biases and take action against it internally,
Yeah.
an external statement is completely irrelevant if we're
Yeah.
not living this stuff internally. And so I my hope is that we find a way to kind of shift this focus on being so angry that companies aren't saying anything. I'm more angry when I see these board of directors that have no people of color and no gender diversity on them. Like, that's more important to me than asking company X to talk about how they feel about whatever social injustice is happening at the time.
Yeah. Cool. Well, a lot to think about, I think,
Yeah.
for everyone listening to this. I'll link up some of your resources in the notes as well. Thank you so much, Brooks.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.